and get, yes, we are recording. So again, depending on, I did not dry my hair today, but I'm still showing my face. You can make the choice that's right for you. Y'all look gorgeous. No matter what, we'll let Bridget in here. All right, so we're gonna jump on in. Day 3. And I'm not even gonna say it's our last day to be together, because at the end of today, we have some things for you to consider. So just kind of be waiting for that. So it may not have to be goodbye forever, unless you want it to be, and that's perfectly okay. We won't judge you. So we're in day 3 of a roadmap to civic re-engagement, reading, writing, and speaking for change. And we've engaged in a lot of conversations over the last few days. And Becky and I are really excited about today's topics and activities. And so let's get going. As always, we want to start with all the introductory things. And we're going to spend some time first thing this morning reconnecting and refreshing our thinking. So yesterday you engaged in some asynchronous learning time, but didn't have a lot of space to unpack that with other people. So we're going to make sure that we have some time for you to do that this morning. So same kind of general gist that we've had each day. We'll have our introductory chunk of the morning. We'll have some new thinking and learning, and this will be focused on the role of discourse. And we'll also touch back on some vocabulary. Yesterday, we were doing some sorting of terms, and we'll kind of continue thinking along those lines of vocabulary a little bit, and maybe touch on some formative assessment pieces as well. We'll have another asynchronous portion, same sort of approach, with that top row being more of the reading and learning, whether it's from, our shared text or the essential practices. And then the bottom row of choices being really those practical boots on the ground, how do I make this happen sort of resources. And then we'll come back together at 1 o'clock, and we'll really be thinking about not only applying to your context and kind of your action planning next steps, but also be thinking about how your thinking has changed over the 3 days with our driving question. So try and come back to that and kind of track the evolution of our thoughts with regard to that. So that's our plan for today. Hopefully that works for you and sounds like a great day. I'll just put our essential agreements back up, and I would be very interested to know, with where you're at today, which could be very different from where you were at yesterday, which of these essential agreements is really, really feeling important to you today? You could just take a moment and type it into the chat. Thank you, Lindsay E. Kyle's getting fancy with the carrot. I'm assuming that means he's agreeing with Lindsay.
Yeah, same as above.
Got it.
Been really awkward if I'd done that at the wrong timing. I just would have rolled with it though.
All right, so we have a few people that are wanting to make sure they're taking care of themselves and others. Jacob's feeling the need to really attend to speaking your truth freely, and hopefully you feel like we have created a space where that can happen. Lindsay B wants to keep the best interests of students at the center. Love that. New one for Kim. Love it. Stay open-minded about how I can make this work without stressing me out too much. I was really thinking about that a lot. I tend to think about work when I'm not at work. I don't know if that's true for any of you. I think it is. And I was thinking a lot about Kyle's question yesterday. And it's really kind of the essential question of like, how do I do all these things and what's the best way to do all of these things? And I that really resonated with me because I also tend to feel really overwhelmed and I really want to do a good job at whatever it is I'm doing. And the tough part about our jobs is that while there is research that's out there, we have people that work in research, that work with teachers and students and produce data about what has worked in that particular context. We know that all research is contextual. And so when we take that research and we apply it to our own context and our own students, it may be different, right? And so I think keeping that in mind has been really helpful for me in my practice, that I want to be research informed, but I also want to be responsive. And so if my question is, if the two questions are, what kind of thinking do I want to develop in my students today? And how can I be helpful in helping students do that? I think if we keep it that simple, I know that seems like I'm way oversimplifying. And then we say, okay, so the type of thinking I really want to develop today is I really want students to get clear on taking a stance on an issue. That's our whole goal. And whatever our content is that we're working with, then that'll be our content. But the thinking is, I really want them to work on this piece. And then the second question, and how can I best help them do that? And hopefully you have a few more tools, maybe some new tools that you weren't aware of before that you know you can go to that are research informed, where you can select some things that can help you accomplish that, whether it's a protocol or, you know, whatever it might be. And because we're never going to have someone that says, okay, this is what you need to do. This is the perfect answer. It doesn't exist. So I just wonder, I don't know if that's more helpful or less helpful. I'm just kind of curious to check in with people because it's been running through my mind since Kyle asked that question yesterday. Anyone have any thoughts?
I think that what you said does make it more concise and frame it in a way that seems manageable. But the underlying reality is, and not that I want someone to say this is the perfect way to do it, but spending the summer doing a variety of different workshops and things makes you kind of spin off your axis a little bit and say, okay, am I doing anything that I should be doing? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I talked with Becky yesterday and, just sitting with it for a little bit and then, moving forward in a way that makes sense, I think is good advice.
Yeah, and maybe you need to do an open sort, Kim, with all the various workshops that you're attending and the books that you're reading. Maybe each piece, maybe the key components of each of those things needs to become a sticky note. And maybe you need to see how those things are grouping together. And then kind of maybe do some color coding on your current state with each of those things. And maybe use that green, orange, pink, or red, to help get a sense of where you might focus your energies first. Because you won't be able to get to all of the things all of the time, right? All right. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in two different breakout rooms. And so we'll do the first breakout room based on the top row choices. So now I'm like really regretting that I closed that tab because I'm going to need to
book and not book.
Yes, that's what I was trying to find out. Thank you.
Got you.
Thank you, Kyle. Book and not book. Oh, that's easy. But for For the second option, I'm still going to need to pull up our slide deck from
So
yesterday.
now you have time.
I know. I got neat, I got neat and I closed it out and really regret that. Okay. So for breakout session 1, we'll just have some time to either discuss book, civically engaged classroom, or essential practices. Just talk about what's standing out to you or what you're wrestling with from that reading. And then we'll come back together and reshuffle based on your bottom row choices. Let me work on getting those. So that was about 7 minutes, which I know is not enough to talk about all of the things. We wanted to make some time for you to have a little bit of chat about your bottom row choices from yesterday. And so I'm wondering if you can give a little bit of feedback. Would 7 minutes feel okay, or more or less? So you can just put in the chat either okay, more, or less. Give us a sense of time. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you had some fantastic conversations. And I'm endlessly nosy and would love to hear just a few highlights, either from your first conversation or your second conversation. And here's what I might offer for us to think about. I'm wondering if during either of your conversations, someone else in your breakout room said something that really kind of sparked your thinking. It either affirmed something you were thinking, or it pushed you a little further. Maybe they said something that you just felt was just really, really smart, and you want to kind of lift that up. So something that you heard from someone else in either of your breakout room conversations that you'd like to lift to the whole group.
I can break the ice on that one. In the second group I was in, we were looking at the open closed word sets. And Jake brought up something from the cult of pedagogy called hexagonal integration, wasn't it, Jake? I can be wrong.
Yeah, it's hexagonal thinking. But
Hexagonal
basically the same
thinking.
thing.
Thank you.
Yep.
And it's something I had been meaning to look up. Like, I had downloaded the podcast and everything, but I hadn't done anything with it because I was like, I'm sleepy. But Jake's actually done it and showed how it was kind of like the next step past those text set or word sets. And like, I am here for it. And I'm glad that other people are also into the cult of pedagogy, because while it does make me feel slightly more culty, I appreciate that I'm not alone. That is all I've got. Someone else go now.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I had not seen that one on hexagonal thinking. I'll often, I do like and recommend, sometimes they have a really nice, concise set of kind of discussion approaches and protocols that I sometimes offer with teachers. There's just a lot there to dig into. If you have not heard of, I believe Jennifer Gonzalez is kind of the main person. Obviously, she has a whole team, but behind the scenes. What else? What other smart things did you hear from your breakout conversations?
For go ahead, Jess.
We might be getting ready to say the same thing, but in our first discussion, we just kind of ended with just try something each day, that there's so much that, and kind of how you addressed at the beginning too, like there's so much. And if you just try something, then you're doing it.
That is so true. You can't do all the things every day, but if you do, maybe there are just 1 or 2 things that you walk away from these 3 days. Like maybe it's just the idea of having kids engage in sorts and having conversations with each other. And you just spend all next year getting really good at doing that and feeling really confident and sharing it with your colleagues. That's the work. That's great work. And it's keeping kids at the center. And I think we need to be able to give ourselves that permission. So was that the thing, Kim? You and Jessica are sharing a brain. All right. What else? All right, I'm going to go ahead and just switch over just for a second. In case you haven't seen it, in our shared document, at the bottom, I've just been adding any resources that come out of our conversations and are shared in the chat. So you can always go back to that and remember the things that we've been sharing with each other. So right now, what I would like to invite everyone to do is take a moment and refresh your memory. I'm just going to ask you to read it to yourself, our driving question for these 3 days, and kind of reread it, get familiar with all the pieces of it, and kind of solidify it in your brain. If it's helpful to you to actually handwrite it out, there's a lot of really powerful research about how handwriting things versus typing things or simply reading them is really helpful to our brains. And what we're going to invite you to do after you've reread the driving question is just make sure that you keep kind of thinking back to it throughout the day. We're going to do a little bit of writing at the end of our day in response to the driving question. And I want you to feel like you're kind of prepared to do that writing. Okay, I have a thumbs up from Kim. Thumbs up from Jacob, Kyle. Mark is celebrating. Wow, that's a lot of enthusiasm for 9:40 in the morning, Mark. But I'm there for it. All right. Lindsay E's a thumbs up. All right. So let's get into it. Let's get into kind of our new pieces of thinking, maybe not new topics, but kind of, our area of focus for this morning. And so we want to really dig in and think about the role of discourse in social studies. And just like some of the previous topics that we've talked about, Becky and I have been really explicit in kind of where we're coming from, right? Like what our stance is on each of these things, whether it's the term literacy or text or writing or whatever it is, right? And the same is true when we're talking about discourse. And so I've taken a little bit of liberty to rewrite this quote from, I won't say long ago because I'm a child of the 70s. So I'll just say a past quote from Britain, which I've used the term understanding, but sometimes you see reading or comprehension, or we see this quote in a variety of ways. And so we're going to make the case that understanding concepts, understanding content floats on a sea of talk. And if we're making that case and really kind of having that clear stance, then we need to dig in a little bit in terms of when we say discourse, when we talk about kids talking, what exactly do we mean? What does it really look like? And what do we really need to be attending to? Because we know kids are talking all day long, right? We know that that's happening. So we need to probably delineate a little bit between the kinds of talking that kids are doing and which ones are really going to get at that understanding piece that we're aiming for. So I have been very influenced when it comes to this idea of discourse in the classroom by the work of Katherine OConnor. And she's at Boston University, and she's collaborated quite a bit with Catherine Snow out of Harvard. And I first became familiar with their work and research through a resource that's actually on our shared document. And it is a group of educational researchers that have created free, open access educational resources. And they refer to themselves as CERP. And yes, it's another acronym, I know. Just tell yourself it's linked on the resource sheet and you can look it up later. But basically what they did was they said, what does the research say about the role of discourse in classrooms? And what do we need to do in order to really bolster students' academic language in service of understanding? And Katherine OConnor has also done quite a bit of work in the area of discourse in the sciences. And we're going to have a chance to read one of her articles in a minute. And even though it was intentionally intended for science teachers, I've used it with teachers of all content areas because I have not found in all of my research on discourse, I have not found an article that hits at all of the important topics that we need to think about when it comes to discourse in our classrooms, except for this one. Like, this is the best one that I've found. So I'm hoping that you'll tolerate that in the article, some of the examples are science examples. Hopefully you can kind of look past that and see how it can be applicable in your social studies classroom as well. One of the things that we'll encounter in the article is this list of 7 elements that Katherine OConnor kind of presents of academically productive talk. And I think that term, academically productive, is really important for us to keep in mind, because what it's saying is it's not just the social discourse that we know is really important for students, but it's that academically focused discourse and that it's productive. It's not just kind of naming what we've learned, it moves us forward, right? And so I think that that's really important, because if we were to say, what's the current state of kids talking, you know, in classrooms around your school, you might say, oh, we hear kids talking all the time. We talk, you know, we do all these sorts of things. And then if we say, and how much of that talk is academically productive, I think our number of instances would go down quite a bit. And there's actually a lot of research to indicate that that's so. So Kathy makes the case that these 7 elements are really important. First, that we need to have a belief that students can actually do this. Because if we don't have that stance, and this is true with anything that we're looking to do instructionally, there's a lot of research that says if we don't believe that students can do a particular thing, they will not do that particular thing. That's just the end of the day. So if we're going to move and work on discourse, academically productive talk in our classroom, we have to start by saying to ourselves, my students can do this. And we know that discourse can quickly get chaotic, right? And it can quickly kind of reinforce some of the unstated norms in a classroom. The kids that talk, the kids that don't talk, right? And so having some well-established ground rules is essential. We have to get that clear and keep coming back to them, much like we've continued to come back to our essential agreements every day. It's not a one and done. And to get at that academically productive part, obviously we have to have clear academic purposes, meaning we have to know how we're expecting to be productive. What are we hoping to move from point A to point B on through conversation? So not just conversation that happens to occur, but intentional conversation. And of course, you can't have any kind of academic conversation that's generative in any way if we're not coming from a stance of really deeply understanding the academic content that we're talking about. She also names the importance of having a framing question, a question worth talking about. I love that she uses those words, a question worth talking about. If students don't feel the question is worth talking about, our conversation will fall flat. We will have to, it'll feel like we're forcing it. And I've lived that in my classroom. Kim's asking, when you talk about the discourse, do you expect all students to engage in the direct conversation? We'll touch on that a little bit. I think that's a great question, Kim. So we need to have a question that's worth talking about and motivating for students, and maybe in our back pocket, some follow-up questions, right? Because until we teach students how to ask good questions of each other, they're going to struggle, right? So in the early stages of developing discourse in our classroom, we need to be prepared to model some of those follow-up questions to keep it going. She also suggests that we need to have an appropriate talk format. So to Kim's question, you know, are we always picturing the whole class and every single student engaging? Or are we talking about a paired conversation or a small group conversation or a Socratic circle or, right? So depending on that academic purpose that we came up with in element 3, we're going to want to choose the format that's going to best support that. And then what we really need to have is a set of strategic talk moves. And in the article, she kind of unpacks what some of those are. And I'll just name that when I've done this discourse work with teachers previously, I typically will start by modeling a particular talk move with something that we're reading. And then I ask teachers to get into groups and practice that talk move with each other. And that often feels very awkward and very uncomfortable, which means it's very necessary. We assume that people are sophisticated in their talk moves, in engaging in discourse. And what we really find is that's difficult for us. And so much like kind of more formal writing that we ask students to do, you know, if we're providing students with stems to support their formal academic writing, we also need to do that with their academically productive talk. It does not come naturally. It has to be modeled and practiced. So that's really kind of the gist of, you know, where Kathy OConnor comes from, and even other researchers that work in discourse. They may use slightly different terms, but they all pretty much say that these are the things that are really necessary in order for discourse to really be moving students' understanding of the content. So if we think about that, and obviously we're thinking about developing students' social studies literacies, right? Their ability to think and communicate like social scientists, then let's see what opportunities this article provides for us. So it's called the Talk Science Primer, and we're going to do a jigsaw. And I'd completely forgotten that I had this in the slide deck, but here I am referencing Cult of Pedagogy. Remember when I said they're all, so I love this article as well about jigsaw method. It's something that's really familiar to most of us in education, but I knew nothing about its history. I knew nothing about like its different iterations. So if that's something that you're curious about, that's actually a hyperlink. If you get into the slide deck and click on it, that might be some research for another day. Doesn't have to be today, but we're going to engage in a jigsaw, a digital jigsaw, which is like, we weren't sure that it could be done when we tried it earlier this year. And good news, it can be done. So that's awesome. And so the way that we're going to do it in the slide deck where it says our text and it's a hyperlink, I'm just going to go ahead and show it to you, open it up, and it's going to spin for a while, and I'll continue to narrate while it's spinning because that's what we do. So when we open up this document, basically what I did was take the article and move it into a Google Doc. But I've also linked in the original PDF of it if you want to see it in kind of more of its original format. And I took the article and I divided it into 4 different chunks. And so you see chunk 1, chunk 2, chunk 3, chunk 4, and each one of those is a bookmark. So when you click on it, it'll take you right to your assigned chunk. Okay, and I see some people are making their way into that. Excellent. Thank you, Kyle. Is that, okay, that looks like, is that the doc itself? I'm trying to tell from the hyperlink.
It's what I have on there. I don't know why it says docs. It's a slide on my end. Maybe because it's view only.
That's interesting. Well, just in case, let me just pull from the doc. That's why I was curious, because when I saw slide, I was like, huh. All right, so try that link, those of you that maybe don't already have it open. And what I'm going to do in just a moment is I'm going to, I'm going to rename so that you know which chunk you need to read. We'll take just a little bit of time for you to individually read your chunk. And then I'll get you together with your expert group members. So the people that read the same chunk as you, so you can kind of say, what's most important in that chunk that we read? And then we'll create mixed groups so that we'll have someone from each of the chunks that can kind of speak to their part. What questions do you have before I start renaming? So what I'm preparing to do right now is open breakout rooms. This will be a quick conversation, and it'll be with people that read the same chunk as you. So there may be 2 of you, there may be 3 of you. And your goal is to really think about, when you get to your mixed group, what's the most important piece that you read in your chunk that you want to highlight for those folks, knowing that you can't represent all the ideas. And if it's helpful for you to like kind of get a sense of time, when you come together with your mixed group eventually, each chunk will have 1 to 2 minutes to talk about the most important point. So when we say the most important point, it doesn't have to be like 1 sentence. So ask yourself, if I could talk for 1 to 2 minutes about my chunk, what would be most important for me to say? Okay. Hopefully that little bit of detail is helpful to you. I'm going to go ahead and open all rooms, and your room number matches your chunk number. And for folks that need help getting to the right chunk, I will be working on that. Oh, there's that recording again. Howdy, welcome back. I was only able to pop in sneakily to the first breakout room, and I felt really good that it was a chunk 4 person that was talking. So I'm hoping in the second breakout room, the chunk 4 person also got to speak. I'm hoping we got our timing right, which is awesome. We've been doing a lot of intense thinking and talking and learning. And it's 10:25, so we are 10 minutes past when we originally intended to take a break. So I'm going to offer that we take a 15-minute break. It's 10:25 right now. I'll see everybody back at 10:40. Oh, there it is. I feel like we should like have like virtual stickers or something that we can give to like the people that turn their camera on first, or like give a signal that they're back. I don't know how to do that. I'm sure someone smarter than me has come up with some ways to do
The
that.
joke would be additional sketches, but I don't think that's legal.
You're right. You're right. I tell you, in writing up the sketch applications, I am as generous as I can possibly be. At some point, I'm going to get in trouble, I'm sure. But that's neither here nor there. And we'll make sure to remove that from the recording. Right, Becky? All right. Well, we have a little chunk of time before we do our lunch and asynchronous portion. And before I kind of dig back into this idea of vocabulary and concept development in social studies, I want to just make something really explicit in case it's a connection that you haven't made. And that is that when Becky and I thought about the flow of the learning across these 3 days, we really wanted it to align to not only the essential practices, but also portions of the C3 framework. And so for those of you that have dipped your toes a little bit into the essential practices, you may have noticed that the first essential practice is to start with problem or inquiry-based approaches. So those compelling questions that we were talking about. And that practice is really foundational. So that's why we started on day one with talking about inquiry, right? And authentic, meaningful learning for students. And then the second and third essential practices are, so you have, a compelling question, now what? And that's why we started thinking about the role of text in our investigations and how to kind of expand that. And then it moved into thinking a little bit yesterday about writing, and that would be practice 4. And today we're digging into discourse, which practices 5 and 6 talk quite a bit about. And we've also touched a little bit on vocabulary, which is practice 7. We've talked a little bit about formative assessment, that's practice 8. And then there are practices 9 and 10, which deal with kind of community networking, kind of that civic engagement piece. And then practice 10 is really digging into students' awareness of the language that they're using. So it's kind of a thread that runs throughout. So that was kind of how we were thinking about moving through the learning and why we were doing that. And I just wanted to take a moment and kind of name that, because sometimes when you're so deep in like the conversations and the learning, you don't have that opportunity to step back. So even if you haven't had a chance, like during our asynchronous times, you may have been really digging into this book, which would be great. And so maybe you haven't had a chance to take a look at the essential practices. That's okay. But I just wanted to name that the learning that we've been doing is kind of aligned with those practices. So at the very least, you kind of have the gist of some of the ideas in that document, in the social studies portion of that document. So with that said, let's think a little bit about, let's come back to the idea of the role of vocabulary. Did someone just?
Yeah, it's Mark. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you
now.
Okay.
So one of the things that I was thinking so I appreciate that recap. And I wanted to say one more thing about the discourse, because I think many have shared that they're ELA teachers as well, or at least have been at some point in the process of this. So one of the things that I was connected with that I heard come up in both of the breakout groups too was this idea of building the discourse, that you don't start large group. And it reminded me of, it's been a few years, but I went to Kelly Gallagher at one point around Read Aside at the time. And one of the things he did to me that was like very impactful, but again, from the ELA bend, right, for the ELA folks, Kelly Gallagher rings out. Social studies people will be like, yeah, article of the week, maybe not know him otherwise.
Yeah. But
he spoke in that particular session that was impactful to me, the idea of starting with reading. So at the time, I think we read some aspect of the Federalist Papers. It was like a chunk of it, and we had to read it ourselves. and we had to write down what it meant to us individually.
Mhm.
Then we were in circle table groups. Then he had us turn to our partner and share what that particular section of the Federalist paper meant. Then we opened it up to our table group. So we went from individual thought and thinking to partner to table to the room. And what was crazy to me was just the emotions I had of affirmation, of well, I was thinking that, I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. So there was more affirmation there, but then learning too, right? Oh, I never thought of it that way versus what my opinion was. So same idea, right? But not with all of this, we didn't have the research in this article behind all that, but we did that process. And I remember thinking to myself, that chunk of the Federalist Papers made so much more sense to me going through the exercise in that way that probably wouldn't have if we would have started with a group discussion and people sharing their big ideas versus me starting individually and having a few thoughts to partner, to table, to larger group. So it's out there in ELA too, not with this terminology. It didn't take time to delve into the research around it, but that's a message it's shared. And Kelly and Penny and others still share similar interactions in their classrooms, but just to connect it to the ELA side.
Thank you, Mark. And to just kind of piggyback on that briefly, I did add in our shared document, based on those talk moves that were mentioned. So chunk 4 people shared with you some talk moves. During some past work that I was doing in districts around discourse, I created kind of handouts or student prompts, and we created them with the intention that they would get, kind of printed out hard copy, like one talk move at a time. And basically what we did, it's trying to open here, is for each of those, so for paraphrasing, clarifying, all of those, we kind of name what it is, what the talk move is, why we use it, and then we give some sentence stems. And so to Mark's point of like starting small and like maybe start with just a partner practicing that talk move, and then maybe having a small mixed group where people are working on it, and focusing in on one talk move at a time, or maybe, 1 or 2. So I linked that into our shared document. If it's something that you're interested in using as kind of a scaffold for your students, don't think that you have to kind of recreate that. And one thing that may or may not have come out of your conversation is that when we think about these talk moves kind of in order, they're really a developmental continuum. And so Kathy OConnor makes the case that it starts with being able to deeply listen to one another. And that may be something that we have to practice. We may have to actually explicitly show students how they need to physically set their bodies in a way to engage in the academic discourse in the way that we're looking for. And that then pushes us to be really thoughtful about the various identities in our room and the norms that exist in their identities outside of school, and to be aware that the norms inside school and what we usually term academic conversations can often look very different. And so that's something worth naming when we're talking about discourse, and it's something to think about depending on the various identities that your students are bringing into the room. But so if we start and we kind of really develop students' ability to really deeply listen to one another, then the next thing that they're able to do, in a kind of a developmental way, is to paraphrase. And that's a skill that takes a lot of time. I've been, fortunate to do some training and learning with Carolyn McCanders around cognitive coaching. And she works primarily with adults in education. And we spend, I don't know how much time, like days, working on just being able to paraphrase. So it really is a skill. And if we can't paraphrase and check and clarify that we're understanding correctly, then it's going to be very difficult for us to effectively critique the claims of someone else, which is much further down that kind of developmental continuum. And so if this is something that you're looking to build in your students, I would recommend starting by building those first 1 or 2 talk moves. And when it seems like students are really getting the hang of it, then work towards some of those more sophisticated moves. So thanks, Mark, for bringing that up. All right, so we know that discourse is really helpful in supporting understanding, right? Understanding floats on a sea of talk. And what's threaded throughout, whether we're doing discourse, academically productive talk, whether we're reading in social studies, whether students are writing in social studies or maybe doing something, we know that there are going to be terms that students come across that are going to be very new to them. And so there are a lot of super smart people that have done a lot of work on the role of effective vocabulary approaches. Here for the next 1 or 2 slides, I am pulling from the work of Dr. Diana Townsend. I've worked with her in a variety of contexts, both with disciplinary literacy and also from the vocabulary slide. And I appreciate some of the ways that she thinks about how we can manage the sheer volume of vocabulary terms that our students are really exposed to within a school day, and how we as teachers can be intentional about the ones that we're really choosing to dig into. And so I wanted to lift some of the ideas that she offers to teachers on how we can kind of manage that sheer volume of words and also make sure that we're effectively supporting our students in not only their word knowledge, but their concept development in social studies, which is the ultimate goal. So we know that students need to have, we know that adults need to have multiple opportunities to interact with words that are new to us in order to really solidify our understanding. That's just how our brain works. We need multiple opportunities. And some of those opportunities are just kind of incidental, right? They just happen. They happen while you're maybe doing a brief lecture burst. They happen while students are engaging in academically productive talk. So some of those incidental exposures to the words are part of those multiple opportunities. It counts, right? But then we also know that we have to have some very targeted, engaging, direct instruction around the most important words, the ones that we've really prioritized. So we're kind of thinking about, so what does that take and what can that look like? And that's where this graphic comes in. On the kind of top left section of this graph, you'll see that she's really recommending the multiple opportunities, but multiple opportunities of what? And she recommends to practice with, like try it on either through discourse or writing or reading, but also to personalize the word meanings. And so that's where approaches like, a prayer model, or kind of other graphic organizers are helpful, because if students can kind of personalize the word meaning as part of those multiple opportunities, then they're going to be more successful in remembering them and using them. So if I had to choose, like if I only had one opportunity in my lesson to have students interact with a definition of a particular word that I was targeting, and my choices were to have them copy down the definition from the dictionary or think about how they could describe that meaning in their own words, I'm going to go with that second option, because that proves to have a bigger bang for its instructional buck. So I just want to name that first piece of it, that personalization. The second thing that she really recommends that we attend to is this idea of independent word learning and word consciousness. And that was newer to me. And so I want to take just a brief moment to unpack it with you. So the independent word learning is just that general curiosity around words, and ways that we really support that often in ELA classrooms, although I would argue it happens more often in elementary classrooms than secondary, is that we have things like, class created word walls, or students may have a portion of their reflection journal that's just dedicated to words. And it may be words that they come across if they're doing some extended reading on a particular topic. It may be something that they've heard in the news. So making space within the kind of rituals and routines that you have in your classroom to kind of lift and honor some of that independent word joy and word exploration, and making a space for it, is really helpful and important. And it doesn't have to take a lot of your instructional time. What it really would take is for you to think about the question, how can I make space for ongoing student independent exploration of words that are related to my social studies course? So depending on kind of the ways that you have students record and share out their thinking, you may want to consider making a space for that. The other piece is the word consciousness, so awareness of words and awareness on a continuum of their understanding of words. And so often what we might do, we have maybe 5 or 6 really, really important terms that are really naming some concepts that are central in a particular unit of study. We might start, before we do any instruction, by asking students, to what extent do you feel that you understand what this word means? And really help them think about their level of understanding on a continuum from, I've never heard it before, to I may have heard it, but I'm not sure what it means, or I've seen it and it looks familiar, or I could teach other people about all the varied meanings behind this word based on context, right? There's a whole continuum. And so helping students raise their consciousness of their current understanding on words and then checking back in on it is a really powerful thing. And then obviously that third one I mentioned already is that really engaging direct instruction. So there may be, before you have students read a particular primary source or engage in a discussion, there may be a particular word that you want them to understand and try on. And it may be a 5-minute mini lesson where you're kind of unpacking for them the things that are going to be important for them to understand on that word. And so the next slide will kind of give some ideas about what not only students' independent exploration of those words might look like, but also what the focus of some of your targeted lessons around words might focus on. So the first thing, if we're kind of thinking, well, how do I decide which terms are the most important to focus on? Diana recommends 3 things. First, what's an essential concept that's coming up? What's a biggie? And maybe you're starting with your standards or a group of standards. And then she asks you to think about, what will students need to be able to do with that concept? All the way from, do you want them to just be familiar with the word, to I want them to know it so deeply that this is going to be a part of their learning forever, right? And it may not be the same depth of knowledge that you need for each word, but to think about that. And then if you were to have students create a concept map with that word in the center, what would you have the categories be? What would you name those other bubbles going around the center? What would be the pieces of the word that you would want them to understand? Are parts of speech important to you? Is it that you want them to really think about other words in that word family that share that same root, right? There are a lot of words that are important in social studies that have that same core root word, right? And by having students understand those roots, we expand their ability to understand new words they come across, right? I'm assuming you are probably, based on our conversation right now, wanting them to be able to make a personal connection to it because you know that's powerful. Maybe you want them to be able to kind of sketch out the word. It just really depends on what the vocabulary term is. Maybe you want them to be able to connect it to previous concepts that you've covered. So you can kind of craft those bubbles that you would want by the end of this direct instruction and multiple opportunities. You would want students to be able to create that concept map and have something to say about each of those categories. And I included here kind of a little graphic above that concept map, which kind of answers the question, what do we mean when we say a student knows a word, a particular vocabulary word, deeply, like really knows it in all its contexts? All of those terms around that kind of really crazy Venn diagram are, when we think linguistically, what it means for students to know a word. It doesn't mean that for our instructional contexts that they need to become experts in all of those pieces. And that's why she suggests that you start by thinking about essential concepts and what you want students to be able to do with that word. So I'm going to pause there and see kind of what's bubbling up and what people are thinking about or maybe wrestling with based on those ideas. So you can go ahead and either unmute or add a thought in the chat. What are you thinking about right now with these thoughts about approaching vocabulary instruction in your classroom?
Am I a robot?
A little bit, Catherine. I mean, not in real life, but your audio.
Yeah, right.
It's better than when
No
we were doing
cat
our
lawyer
group
here.
session. It's not at 100.
Okay. I'm excited about using this strategy for the 8 traits of civilization. And so I've just, we've been given what the traits are, but the students haven't really discussed like what religion or belief system means this way. And I think this will be really important. And like a key term could be government. What does that mean? And so I can't wait to use this conceptual map with those traits.
Thanks, Catherine. You know, one of the things that I think bubbled up a little bit in the chat yesterday was this idea of divergent thinking. And I was kind of naming that the open sort that we did, as well as the question formulation technique, are ways to support and honor divergent thinking. And I think that the more that we can move toward helping our students understand the nuance when it comes to the meanings of words, that's also making space for divergent thinking. And it just makes sense. It doesn't make sense for us to give students the impression that a word has one particular perfect definition that's going to fit all contexts, because we know that's not how language works. So our instructional approaches need to be in line with what the type of thinking we're trying to honor. We're trying to foster students understanding nuance with words And so our instructional practices need to be in line with that. What else?
So I don't know if this is facetious or not, but and I, full disclosure, I'm think of myself more of as an English teacher, but I'm in here because I'm teaching current events. So I wonder how, because the pushback might be, well, this seems a lot like an English lesson that I'm teaching vocab this way in this explicit manner. How do you determine the trade-off of, is this amount of specific instruction and vocabulary worth it, as opposed to spending more time on content approaches that are maybe more traditional to a history or geography class?
Well, I think one of the things that is very common that we hear from teachers is that students don't retain the things that they've learned, right? Like, I taught that already. We did that unit, right? And students aren't retaining it either from unit to unit or from year to year. It's a very common thing that we hear. And part of the reason why is because our approaches, understandably, because we have structures that are kind of encouraging this kind of instructional approach, is to try and cover everything and to take all this content and squeeze it into this, tiny amount of time. And we know it doesn't work, right? We have lots of research to tell it doesn't work. We have anecdotal evidence when students aren't retaining it that it doesn't work. And so I guess the response, if teachers were asking that, is in this way, teaching your essential concepts and helping students unpack it is actually going to help them as they're engaging with the content. It's going to deepen their understanding of it. It's going to give them more language around it. And that's why we only do it with the most important ones. So when Katherine was naming some like big concepts that are going to be coming up in that particular unit, those are the ones that you want to spend some time really unpacking with students and attending to, because all of the content they're going to continue to engage with, they're going to connect it back to that concept map. And we know that the brain works in patterns. And that's how we consolidate our understanding around things. So if it's continuously just separate idea, separate idea, separate idea, separate idea, and never have the chance for students to consolidate and do some of that patterning with their most important ideas, then we're not acting in ways that function within how the brain works. So I think it's kind of a, we're trading off a little bit of instructional time for more successful instruction around all of those factual pieces that we're trying to attend to.
Thank you, Janelle. That was helpful, especially the part about sort of using the vocab instruction to build patterns and make larger pictures. I appreciate that.
I'm looking in the chat and Katherine's offering my self-check with time of vocabulary goes back to what Janelle mentioned, is what vocabulary do I want students to know forever? Yeah, for sure. And Becky's offering integrate this work with some of the resources in which students will engage, like primary and secondary source documents. Absolutely. If we know that students are going to be engaging with a really difficult, meaty primary source document, and there's a key concept that really kind of encompasses that whole thing, spending time unpacking together, maybe it's a collaborative concept map, and then coming back to it after the reading of the primary source document would be just amazingly powerful. Not only are you really doing a good job of front loading and scaffolding student understanding so that you don't have to hold their hand and read the primary source to them, because that's what we do. That's what we do when students can't engage in it independently. We read it to them because we're problem solvers, right? And so we know we need to get students to be engaging in those texts independently. So what do we need to do instructionally so that they can get there, right?
I think to build on that too, Janelle, and what Becky shared, don't forget, I think it's natural to resort back to just even when we hear the term vocabulary, how we were taught vocabulary.
Yes.
And obviously most of the time we were taught vocabulary was in ELA. So remember, this is still about your discipline. So when you start to teach vocabulary, maybe in a way that's more conducive to social studies, whether it be in a primary, secondary resource or however, if you keep these big ideas in mind, but teach it a different way, that's okay. Like the big ideas are there to guide. But if you want to go like some crazy vocabulary way that you know your teacher back in the day would have absolutely not had anything to do with it, that's okay. Like teach the vocabulary the way it makes sense, that you now are the teacher of social studies and this makes sense to you to help make sense for the kids. Go there. So I think it's sometimes that permission, because our default, like in anything, is to do what we've experienced or done in the past. And this is permission to branch out beyond that.
And here's the dirty little secret that we don't often talk about. And that is, we assume that ELA teachers are engaging in best practice around vocabulary instruction. And the dirty little secret is that's not always true. So, and they're certainly not going to be targeting the most important concepts in social studies. They're not going to pick terms that are going to be helpful to you. I can tell you that right now. They're going to be picking their own concepts that are important, right? So, I mean, that's just the reality. And then if you think about, I don't know if you remember, but day one of the very first things we asked you to do, we had that artifact. We had an image that we asked you to look at. And we said, how can you describe this artifact without any form of communication or language? Do you remember that? And you were like, we can't. So if it's helpful to reframe this, and instead of referring to this as vocabulary and to think of it as developing social studies language, I don't know who else is better suited to do it, to develop student social studies language, than social studies teachers. I wouldn't leave that to an ELA teacher personally, because they don't know the essential concepts unless they're a dual person like Kyle. And we know that those folks are few and far between that come with both the ELA and the social studies lens.
And we're usually better at one than the other.
Absolutely. We can't be experts in everything. Okay. I love this conversation. I love moving away from those old ways of thinking about vocabulary and really thinking about language. Like there's a lot of power there. Before we head into our asynchronous time, we've kind of brought up this idea of formative assessment in a variety of ways. But I wanted to take a moment and unpack some language. So, a concept is formative assessment, right? That's a concept. And we each probably come with our own understandings of that concept. I'm sure if I had each of us create a concept map for that term, formative assessment, we'd have a lot of different ideas, right? I'm imagining. And so I want to see what happens. Let's just do a thought experiment. We've been doing a lot of them over the past 3 days, and we haven't broken anything. And thus far, we're all still living. So we might as well do another one. So the Michigan Assessment Consortium, you may or may not be aware of them. They're doing a lot of really powerful work around assessment, and specifically this idea of formative assessment. And if any of you have participated previously in the FAME project, that's that's coming out of the Michigan Assessment Consortium. And so I wanted to offer their definition of formative assessment. And I would love to see how that shifts our thinking and what it brings up for us. So before I even read it, just in your mind, take a moment. If someone came up to you on the street and said, I will give you $1 million, define formative assessment, what would you say? Just take a moment, solidify that in your brain. Get past being excited about $1 million. Got it? Or at least a good enough version of it? Okay, so here's where deep listening is going to come in. So I'm not going to put the MAC definition up on the screen. I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it slowly, and I'm going to read it 2 times, because the first time you're just getting the gist. The second time, you'll be able to hone in on portions, okay? And while you're listening, probably that second time around, I want you to hone in on 1 or 2 phrases that you heard that if you could go back and add to your original $1 million answer, you would. What 1 or 2 phrases would you add on to your previous definition? Your answer might be nothing. I got it, nail on the head. I might as well be the director of Michigan Assessment Consortium. You know, that's fine too. My guess is there might be something that comes out of it that wasn't part of your initial definition, but we'll see. Here we go. Formative assessment is a planned, ongoing process used by all students and teachers during learning and teaching to elicit and use evidence of student learning to improve student understanding of intended disciplinary learning outcomes and support students to become self-directed learners. Effective use of the formative assessment process requires students and teacher to integrate and embed the following practices, you'd have to go onto their website, in a collaborative and respectful classroom environment. So here are some of the requirements. Clarifying learning goals and success criteria within a broader progression of learning, eliciting and analyzing evidence of student thinking, engaging in self-assessment and peer feedback, providing actionable feedback, and using evidence and feedback to move learning forward by adjusting learning strategies, goals, or next instructional steps. So here we go with the second time. Formative assessment is a planned, ongoing process used by all students and teachers during learning and teaching to elicit and use evidence of student learning to improve student understanding of intended disciplinary learning outcomes and support students to become self-directed learners. Effective use of the formative assessment process requires students and teacher to integrate and embed the following practices in a collaborative and respectful classroom environment. Clarifying learning goals and success criteria within a broader progression of learning, eliciting and analyzing evidence of student thinking, engaging in self-assessment and peer feedback, providing actionable feedback, and using evidence and feedback to move learning forward by adjusting learning strategies, goals, or next instructional steps. So now back to that prompt. What one or two phrases from this definition would you like to add, if any, to your previous definition? You can either offer in the chat or unmute and share with us what's coming up. Okay. Lindsay E is offering in the chat, formative assessment leads to a self-directed learner. What else? Catherine's offering students self-assessing. Jacob's offering that formative assessments are an ongoing process, which helps students become independent. Jessica is agreeing with that self-assessing piece, that might be, a newer piece to kind of add in and think about. I think for me, my initial understanding of formative assessment is very, very different from this definition. I think I kind of understood it like before I started a unit of study to kind of get a sense of what students knew or didn't know about the topic, and then kind of hopefully decide what I should hone in on. But I really appreciate this very in-depth, nuanced way of thinking about formative assessment and the way that it intentionally brings in the students into part of that. And so hopefully you found something useful in that definition as well. Stacy's offering formative assessment helps educators know where to guide the instruction based on students' needs. Yeah, and that's where this, you may have heard the term assessment for learning. And that's kind of one that I keep in my back pocket. Like, we know in our current climate that there is assessment that happens just because it has to happen, because we're told it has to happen. We may have benchmark assessments we have to do, or common assessments. We have things like the SAT and PSAT. But there are those assessments that we do have control over that really can inform our instructional moves. And those are the ones that we're really talking about. Yeah, Mark said ongoing and clarifying learning goals and success criteria within the broader progression of learning. Second part will be key, especially in the context of our compelling questions. Yes, to drive the inquiry. Absolutely. Thanks everybody for offering your thoughts. So as we're kind of rounding out our morning, I'd like to invite just a little additional reflection. There are many keywords in our driving question, but two of them I want you to hone in on. And that is the word explicit and the word intentional. And we've used those words a lot. You've heard them in the driving question. And I'd like to invite you to think about those two words right now. And based on our reading, learning, discussions that we've had over the past few days, in what ways is your thinking evolving around those terms? And if it's helpful to you to frame your reflection using this STEM, you could use the I used to think, but now I think structure to help kind of frame your reflection. So take just a moment or two to think about the ways your thinking is changing around the words explicit and intentional. Okay, here's where bravery comes in. We're all brave. Can I get 2 people to unmute and share what you thought about during those 2 minutes?
I can go. I think for me, the words explicit and intentional are sort of a friendly challenge to us that this is not going to happen by osmosis. Like a lot of us sort of think, well, if I'm teaching my units, or we all have too much to do and not enough time to do it in. So it would be really reassuring for us to say, well, I'm already doing this, or I can do this with minimal extra effort, which would be wonderful. And I'm not saying we can't find a way to do that, but if we want to build sort of disciplinary literacy, or kind of help students make the connection between what you do in the classroom and what happens in the real world with civic action, it has to be explicit and intentional. So I guess maybe the key is, how do you do that in an efficient and effective way? But it still has to be something that you're planning, that won't just happen by osmosis. And I think, as I'm talking myself through this, the kids they don't know what we know. So we really have to make that connection for them explicit, for them to even realize it's happening. So that's what I'll say. I don't want to hog all the airtime, but that was the connection that I made. So.
Thank you. That was not hogging at all. You took 1 minute to share your thought. And so we still have plenty of time for at least one additional person to share their thinking. And the great news is there are no wrong answers. So bonus.
I'm just going to say something about intentional. I've spoken with a lot of different folks, and I think the climate that we're in today, there's a fear factor of, if I make change, will it have the right impact that it's supposed to have, and who's going to circle around and check in on me, and if my scores don't move, etc. What I always try to share in my conversations with staff, teachers, etc., is if you're intentional and you come to a conversation at some point, if you're able to articulate the intentional moves that you made or intended to make a difference, you are going to be leap years ahead of most of the other people that just kind of throw their hands in the air like, I don't know what to do now, why didn't it work? So I think just in making a plan and having intentional next steps, even if they don't work how they need to, because we're making our next best guess based on what we think these kids need and how to move them forward. If it doesn't pan out, well, at least we know that's not something that we needed to go into as much depth, and we make a different decision the next time around. But even if that rings true, we can say intentionally, this is what we did, this is what we focused on, this was our research and our learning. Now I got that. Let's look at what's coming next.
Just to piggyback onto that, you made me think of when you were saying that, maybe the easier question, instead of saying being intentional, what is your why? There should always be the what is your why behind it. And instead of, using that more elevated term, just like, why are you doing it and what is your goal? And how are you specifically going to try to accomplish it?
Thank you so much. So we got 3 people to talk. So we're extra crediting here. So we're going to move into our lunch and asynchronous portion. Just like always, you will, in our slide deck for today, on slide 17, you have your choices and you have hyperlinks that will lead you to those choices, so you don't have to hunt anything down. So again, we have a top row choice that you'll make, either book, and in this case, it's encouraging you to explore the companion resources, the online resources for our shared text. or the essential practices, or the website civicallyengaged.org. And then the bottom row is more of that nuts and bolts kind of practical. Oh, look at me, Past Janelle did add that in. I'm telling you, Past Janelle just does all the things. I didn't have to put it in our additional helpful resources. All right, bottom row is kind of those nuts and bolts, boots on the ground kind of resources. And so you can clearly see that there's an emphasis here on kind of supporting discourse and language development. So again, you are the professional, you choose how you're going to kind of divide up your time, but in general, we want you to for sure take a 30-minute break at some point, step away from your computer, spend about 30 minutes on a top row choice and about 30 minutes on a bottom row choice. And we will be here and available should any questions come up during that asynchronous time. And we plan on rejoining one another in the Zoom. So if you want to leave the Zoom and come back, that's fine, at 1 o'clock, and we'll have our last hour and a half together. So thank you so much for all your thoughtful thinking and learning this morning. And I look forward to seeing you again this afternoon. There we go. Well, people are making their way back. I know that Bridget was, she sent me a little DM saying that she got whisked away for a grant conversation. She's hoping to rejoin us. But if you know anything about how university work goes, if there's a grant involved and someone's willing to give you some money for your work, you need to take that meeting. So hopefully she'll be able to rejoin us. And if not, we'll certainly miss her, but glad that we have some space this afternoon to kind of keep things moving forward. And so Becky and I, when we were thinking about how to best use this last hour and a half, we had some ideas, and then we also have a little bit of like kind of looseness and lack of structure to kind of accommodate this being kind of our last chunk of time together. But before we dive into a little bit of extended writing, and don't worry, no 5-paragraph essay required. You can choose your mode and format. But before we do that piece of it, I just wanted to check in. We won't do like a formal share out, where like you go in your breakout rooms and based on, which resources you interacted with during the asynchronous time. So I want to do it in kind of a less structured way and just with our whole group together with this question. And that is, what is something that you explored during our asynchronous time that you are just burning to share with another person? You either need to just kind of talk through it to kind of solidify it or understand it better in your brain, or you're like super excited about it, or you're like really mad about it and you just need to vent. Like that was terrible. I can't believe I spent my precious time looking at that thing. Whatever it is, something that you're really fired up about. And I'm wondering if we can just kind of unmute and just talk with one another about what that was and what you're thinking about it.
Can I ask a question about one of the websites? Yep. Is anyone here a member of the Civically Engaged website? I had actually found it before we started our piece, and so you have to fill out an application and an interview to get on the website as a member. So I wondered if anyone had been through that, because it looks amazing, the resources potentially that are on there. But I got an email from the founder of the site, and you have to set up a Calendly link to interview and fill out an application. So just in case anyone else didn't, I didn't know if anyone else had done that before.
Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't gotten that far into it to realize they had some quality control measures, which I'm kind of thankful for, in place. So if anyone kind of follows that and, you know, kind of goes through those steps, I would imagine it's not going to be anything like the interview process you had to go through to get hired as a teacher. Probably just making sure, right?
Yeah. I'm planning on doing that. So if anyone wants to know what it's like, I just got the email back. You have to initially put in that you want to be a part of it, and you have to give them a reason, and then he contacts you to set it up. And so I'm in the process of doing that. So if anyone wants to know what that's like, I can always let you know afterwards.
What did you say you needed for the interview process? You said
it doesn't say. It just says to fill out the application, which I haven't filled out yet, so I don't know what that looks like. And then it says they will send you a Calendly link to talk about why you want to be a part of the website.
okay.
I thought it was interesting because I looked at that resource first, and how it said Teach Truth hashtag was created in response to nationwide efforts to silence educators who believe in teaching students about structural racism. Like, it was very clear the you know, what they want to accomplish. And I feel like so many things that we look at because of the controversy and the different perspectives and things, that a lot of this stuff gets so murky so quickly, and it's hard to know which resources to use and which are going to be okay and not be afraid to use. So I'm glad you brought that up, Lindsay, because I was like, oh, I can't click on anything. There's not really any resources. And then it's like, oh, click here to apply. And I'm like, what am I getting myself into? So
That's fair. What else? What other burning thoughts are kind of moldering in that brain of yours?
I didn't know that the UN had 17 sustainable development goals. And so, yeah, so I'm pretty excited about learning about that. And I've gone from having 3 preps last year, including different grade levels of current events, to not having that, but one of my colleagues is picking it up. And so I just sent her that link because I think that that's something that's really going to help her. But I'm intrigued with it too.
Yeah, to build off of that, Catherine, I was really excited to see that sustainable development idea as well. I think it's a great way to, when we talk about civic action, right, it's a great way to integrate that in a cohesive, compelling narrative, like, hey, there are 17 targets that you can shoot at to make the world a better place, and pick one, right? Regardless of what class you're teaching, it's going to connect to one of those things. So I was excited to see that as well.
Awesome. What else?
I just had a question. This was from I don't know, it feels like a couple days ago. It might have even been yesterday. But in the general practices, in the number 7, the tier 2 and tier 3 vocab, I did have to step out for dealing with my son. But did you talk about the tier 3 versus tier 2?
I did not get into that depth because I was a little worried that it might cause brain explosions for folks not coming from ELA backgrounds. And looking at some people's faces, they're like, thank you. But in general, when we kind of distinguish between those two, tier 2 words, and it's not like, you know, it's not like, I mean, I think there are some generally agreed upon, but there's some flexibility, like all things with language. But tier 2 words are kind of those general academic terms. So Kim, you and I were talking about like the IB command terms, like evaluate, explain, you know, those, they often tend to be kind of action verbs about what we're asking students to do on assessments. So that those are some examples of what we would call tier 2 academic words that can be used broadly across the school day. And then tier 3 are those ones that are discipline specific, the ones that that you in your course kind of own. And if you're not helping students unpack that language, they probably won't have that opportunity, right? So it's those really essential terms that are going to come up based on your standards and your curriculum that you want to really hone in on.
And just a follow-up question on vocab. I have, through the reading apprenticeship, tried to teach kids to identify what they don't know in readings that we do. And so there's always terms in there that are not really even tier 2 or tier 3, but I think that recognizing vocab they don't know and trying to figure out is a good strategy. What I'm struggling with is I know which terms I want to highlight in terms of my tier 3, and we put those on the word wall and we talk about them and use them in context, but I don't know what to do with all the other terms that they themselves identify as terms that they don't know. I know you mentioned doing something like maybe something in a workbook or a journal. To what degree do you think it's necessary for me to continue focusing on them identifying and working with, to some degree, vocab they don't know?
I think it's really essential, you know, on that one slide where we have kind of the 3 components of the pie chart of having like a really well-rounded approach to developing language, that developing word consciousness and, you know, personal connections and personal investigation of words is really, really important. And I don't know if you were here when I, you know, kind of indicated this, but I think often we assume that the ELA teachers across the board are doing a really excellent job of kind of supporting students' word consciousness and curiosity and, you know, exploration of language. And I think it just really depends teacher to teacher, because often as secondary ELA educators, we're very well trained to teach literature. We receive—
And that's about it.
Yeah, we're a little less supported in developing some of those other areas of literacy. And so I just happen to be like a weird, unique, no, I'll say unique, not weird. I'm a unique unicorn in that I'm elementary trained, and then I just happened to land in the secondary world. And so I was able to kind of bring that forward. But for the most part, we can't assume that ELA teachers are developing that word curiosity and consciousness in a way that's going to be sufficient for what students really need. So if you're asking, like, should I keep doing that? Yes, you should keep doing that.
Is there a good strategy in terms of what I should be having them do with it? Because right now it usually just ends up some talking to the text where they identify words, and we as a class, you know, if students can help each other to define them, but I don't take it further than that. Should there be some kind of logging or using, or?
I don't think that we need to go to a super formal route for those individual words. I think just developing some rituals and routines around it, like what you're talking about, and kind of establishing from the outset, like in this class, we're curious about language and we pay attention to language because we know it's going to help us understand and communicate better, right? And so some of our things might just be individual exploration. Maybe it's just jotting some notes in a journal. Maybe it's like doing some sketchnoting as they're kind of learning some things. I wouldn't go to having students have to turn it in and having it be something that's graded and things like that, because you really want to save your instructional energy and students' energy on those core, really prioritized language terms that are going to really support them in terms of the concepts that you're trying to develop.
I was trying out something right before the pandemic hit that I totally forgot to come back to, but I thought it was a neat idea, so I'm throwing it out there now to see if it actually is neat or if I'm like out of my mind here. I remember getting to do an activity where I was doing that type of activity, and I basically I came up with about 60-70% of their vocab or lit terms for a concept and had them come up with the other 3 or 4 and kind of have a little discussion on which ones they thought were the most important to what we were doing.
Mhm.
And then at the end of the activity, after they decided it, I let them know that on their next quiz, they were going their paragraph ready, and they were going to have to use 3 or 4 of a list of their however many terms that we'd come up with. So it kind of let them see that there was a immediate scholastic value, which helped build some of the other stuff. And then of course, pandemic. So I have no idea if it was actually any good, but
Right.
I always thought it was a neat idea.
Yeah, there's some interesting research, and of course I can't immediately pull up who it was that was engaging in the research about like multiple short cycle, quick assessments, like a quiz, and students' retention of certain small bits of knowledge. And so I think that, you know, being really explicit and clear on maybe just the most important. When you said 60 or 70 terms, I was a little taken aback because that seems like a lot for students to take on. So I think if I offered any critical friend feedback, it might be, you know, how might be some ways that you could kind of group those or have students group them into categories or kind of narrow it down a little bit. But I think there's value in honoring when students are applying using the terms. And, you know, it can be as corny as when you're having a discussion and a student correctly uses the term, you know, doing like a really silly Sesame Street sort of like, yeah, you know, or I guess that's Pee Wee Herman, Pee Wee's Playhouse, right? The word of the day, and everyone would go like, yeah, right? Or, you know, it could be as much as like really acknowledging if you're going to be using mentor text, right? Like making writing visible and kind of unpacking it, it can be really powerful if you have a student that, you know, you're really maybe looking to kind of bolster and you want to kind of honor, and maybe that student has done a really great job of applying a particular vocabulary term in their writing, and, you know, you get their permission and then you share it with the class and say, like, this is an example of what we're looking for in terms of bringing those terms that we're learning about and using them in our communication. Like that can be really powerful too, beyond just, you know, it's going to be on the quiz. Like, yes, there is, it seems like some value in doing that, you know, maybe not in a punitive way, but then how powerful would it be to also give value to that writing by using it as a mentor text?
That's where you can use your new dance button. They say the word, hit the button, teacher dances.
You'll get them using those words, I guarantee.
Janelle, was it retrieval practice you were referring to?
Yes.
Because I think I just found the Cult of Pedagogy article on that one too.
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah,
if you
thank
wanted the research, I can throw that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. Anything else? This won't be the last time that we have an opportunity to kind of have some unstructured conversation. So if you can't think of something right now, that's okay. So let's make a little bit of space for some synthesis. I think it's been a recurring theme we've heard various people saying, and again, this, you know, is not surprising. Teachers tend to be very hard on themselves and, you know, type A personalities and wanting to do all the things all at once, all the time. And so it can get overwhelming because we've touched on a lot of ideas in these past 3 days, right? And it can feel like it's all just kind of swirling in your brain. So I'm hopeful that over the next few minutes, you're going to have some quiet time to try and synthesize the important pieces or ideas that seem to be kind of recurring threads, or, you know, the biggest chunks of what we've really been touching on. And to do that, I'm going to ask that you revisit our driving question, which is, how can research-based resources, I shouldn't say to help me be more intentional and explicit in developing students' social studies literacies? I'm going to ask you to look through our resources from the past 3 days, look through your notes, think about it, spend some quiet time. If you want to like kind of turn camera off and really zoom in on your own brain, go ahead. And the question is, how might you answer this driving question now? You don't have to have the perfect answer because, spoiler alert, there is not a perfect answer. There's your best answer right now. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to write your best answer right now and to write for as long as you can. That might mean that you ramble. That's okay. Your writing may be disorganized. That's okay. The way you choose to structure and format your writing may look different from other people. That's okay. What we're aiming for is the quality and depth of your thought. What questions do you have for me? Okay, I have a question for you. How long do you need to do a quality job at this writing? I see a few suggestions of 10 to 15 minutes. So we're going to go long because I think we need to also include time for you to look over things, look over resources and notes. And I'd like you to challenge yourself to, when we say write long, if you could write fairly continuously without long chunks in between for about 7 minutes, I think that would be amazing. A good rule of thumb is if your hand isn't hurting, you haven't written long enough. Sound good? All right, I'm going to set a timer. We'll check back in with each other in about 15 minutes. I'm excited to see what you come up with. And I promise you that whatever you have written up to this point is just perfect, exactly what it needs to be. And I'd like to invite us as we're making our way back to think back to our essential agreements that we've been, I think, doing an amazing job of honoring over the past 3 days. We said that it was important for us to engage in humble inquiry, to keep the best interest of students at the center, to speak our truths freely, and take good care of ourselves and others. We added in a few additional ones based on our needs each day, right? So with those essential agreements in mind, I'm hoping that it feels safe enough for you to be a little bit vulnerable. This is often something that we don't admit to in education, but taking ourselves out of our comfort zone can often make us feel very vulnerable. And it also helps us build a lot of empathy for our students with the ways that we are stretching them beyond their comfort zones as well. So all of that is a fancy way to lead up to me saying, I'd love it if a couple, maybe 3 people would be willing to be vulnerable, even if it's not something that you normally do, and share your writing with us. And what's going to come out of that is I'm going to invite everyone to navigate to frame 2 in our Jamboard. I put the link in the chat just so you don't have to go searching. And on frame 2, all I did was repeat our driving question. And everyone's going to have a role right now. The person who is sharing their writing has a role of sharing their writing. Those of us that are listening are going to be really closely listening. And we want to land on one nugget, one word or phrase or idea that we heard that person share in their writing that we think we really want to remember. And we'll put it on a sticky note on frame 2 of our Jamboard. So here's where I hand it over to you and see who might be willing to be a bit of a risk taker and share what they wrote.
I'll start us off.
Thanks, Jake.
So in response, I looked at 2 of the resources that were explicitly from the past couple of days. The first one was just from the textbook we use, specifically about how students identify themselves and creating a comfortable classroom for them to feel like I'm in a safe space where I can express myself. I've had students in the past who have different gender identities and different sexual orientations. And it shocked me how open they were about I had one girl come up to my desk the first day and just straight out tell me. And just that level of comfort was awesome to have in my room. However, I know that's not true for all students. So using these strategies from the textbook to have that level of comfort is going to be really helpful. The other was the Stanford History Education Group, the one we talked about yesterday or the first day. They already had those pre-planned lessons on the Cold War, on Stonewall, where they're already created for us. And I really like using that tool in my own classroom because this allows me, I don't have to worry about the planning process. It's more about I can intentionally ask those questions, and I can be very explicit with what I want to highlight rather than focusing on making a successful lesson. It's more about I can dive deeper into those topics. And just one, recently the UN Sustainability Goals, specifically for my civics class, to highlight some international aspects of civics related to education. Because in civics, we get so caught up in the American form of government where we can do a fun comparing what these goals are, how they function in other countries. It's just bringing those 3 together, I really liked to help with my students' literacy.
Can we give Jacob some snaps here for putting himself out there and sharing his thoughts?
Thank you.
Nice. We got some people putting sticky notes on the Jamboard about what really resonated with them from your writing. So thank you, Jacob. And sorry that Superman is weighing in. Apparently he feels very strongly about civic engagement as well. I had no idea. So I'm learning something new.
Is that a positive meow or a negative meow? That's going to be...
I'm a little concerned. Oh, but now he's giving himself a bath. So
never mind.
Maybe that was the issue all along. Who would, I won't say like to, who is willing to put themselves out there and go next?
I'll do it if nobody else wants to.
Yay, Lindsay B.
All right, I'm not going to reference a specific resource. I just kind of wrote, right? I said, I think designing instruction with research-based resources built into the lesson creates structure for your classroom. It gives students a purpose while they're in your room, not just to sit and get or keep them busy for 60 minutes. Utilizing research-based resources for instruction is intentional, with the mindset of helping students develop skills that will set them up for success in any setting, not just cramming content in without a purpose. Research-based resources make instruction explicit by making expectations for and of students clear so they understand their purpose. They promote engagement and active learning. They bring a variety to our classrooms so students aren't always doing the same things and they get bored. They can be used in all content areas, and they're not subject specific.
Love that. I'm not usually an emotional person, but I'm tearing up a little bit. So I may need to go get a Kleenex at some point. I know people are like, oh my gosh, is she going to ask? Is she going to ask if one more person is willing to share? You know I am. And you know, those of you with your camera on, and even if your camera is not off, I'm like giving you the look. And I'm going to say this. I have never been unsuccessful with the eyebrow wiggle, the inviting eyebrow wiggle. It works every time. So I'm going to say, can we get one more person to share what they wrote? Now watch, everybody look. I don't care if your camera's on or not. Watch the eyebrows.
I've had a horrible headache going for like the last 15, 20. I'll be honest, I didn't write a darn thing and the wiggle still worked on me. I did think about the question. I just didn't write a darn word.
Totally fine.
All right. I think the big piece that I took out of this, and I want to get the question back up. So give me 1 second here, just so that way I'm at least doing this sort of right. I think this helped me kind of get a sense of how I want to start structuring things within a unit. Like I mentioned yesterday, that I struggle when I don't know exactly where I'm going, like have my framework built out. And I don't think that's a question that I'm just going to be able to get answered just in 10 minutes or anything like that. But I think this is one of those things where I can at least, because I like planning. I actually enjoy planning. I might enjoy it more than the teaching, which is a problem, but whatever. So I think it's one of those things where I'm going to start like in the next week or so, just kind of picking a unit and go, okay, this is my goal with this strategy. We have a lot of different tools here. Because I know that I want to get better with my communication in the classroom. I really enjoy having those student talk phrases. I'm highly considering just making like a copy of like 20 of them and putting them around my classroom. So that way I can also use that as a modeling tool with my students. So that way they know the language to use from the get-go. And then picking one piece that I might use, say week 2 or week 3, and just roll from that. I'm not saying that it'll necessarily make it immediately to unit 2, unit 3, or whatever the heck it might be, but at least having that piece started from, and that way I can kind of see how it's going early rather than how do I try to approach this whole year? Don't know, throw up, I'm done.
Hey, Kyle, I think you and I need to work together on that because I'm feeling pretty much the same way.
Yeah, hopefully, depending on the classes we end up with, it'll solve some of the issues, but we'll see.
I love that. Hopefully you saw the snaps that people were giving you, Kyle, for sharing yourself, sharing your thoughts. And we've had people continuing to add what's resonating with them onto our Jam board. So thank you so much to those of you that just put yourselves out there. It's always beneficial to be willing as teachers to put ourselves in a vulnerable space so we can remind ourselves of what that feels like and be more empathetic as we're moving into what is sure to be a really interesting school year, right? That students are coming to us with a variety of experiences that they've had over the past year. And if we can come into our classes each day with a little bit of empathy, that will go a long way. And empathy isn't pity. Empathy is, I know what it's like to put yourself out there and share your writing in front of other people, because I took this PL with this crazy woman, Janelle, and this very sane woman, Becky, and I had to share my writing. So I know where you're at, right? So a question for the group, and any answer that you give is 100% okay. But what I've done in our MCSS Summer Series Helpful Resources doc, which I'll drop the link back in the chat for you. You may already have it open. If you already have it open, you may want to do a quick refresh, because for the next few minutes, I updated the sharing settings and I made it so that you have the ability to edit the doc. And at the bottom of the document, you'll see a little section that says contact information. I'm going to assume email is probably, what we'll probably revert to, but contact information for those who want to continue to stay in touch. That may be as much as, hey, if I have a question, can I reach out and email you? It may be as much as, you and I had a conversation and I'd like to follow up on that and do a little planning with you, to, whatever is going to be beneficial. But if that's something that you feel you are interested and open to, just ask you to share your name and your email address, because sometimes with those email addresses, it's hard to know who that person is. So just make it really clear who you are and what your email address is. And we'll make sure that, you continue to have access to this document so that you can stay in contact with each other and hopefully with us. Yes, I'm going to add my name and email in just a moment when I stop rambling. So I think I'll turn it over to Becky for a few kind of like things, like any matters of business, any things in terms of sketches, and also not sure if you wanted to share with them the survey and things like that. So I just want to make sure that I didn't forget those pieces.
Okay. I just popped the link to the survey in the chat. Our hope is that you would take some time to fill that out for us. It really helps not only me and Janelle from a facilitator standpoint, it also helps the folks at MCSS get a sense of how well received this type of institute was for future planning. Usually the last couple of years, it's been me approaching the executive board and saying, hey, I've got an idea for a summer institute. What do you guys think? So it was a lot easier this spring to utilize the info from last summer's institute in order for them to say, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Go for it. So anything that you can contribute to that survey would be greatly appreciated. Additionally, just a plug for MCSS. If you're not an MCSS member, I would be thrilled if you would consider becoming one. We are going to continue our webinar series into the fall, and I'm sure we will do one in the spring as well. Additionally, we have a lot of resources available on our website. We also have a lot of folks that network. So you're not alone. You've got this community of MCSS folks that are there and are willing to help. So consider becoming a member. I think it's, the best $40 you'll ever spend to be part of a professional organization. And lastly, the SCECHs that we applied for have not been approved yet. We anticipate that they are going to be. It's just that the person at the state who does the approvals apparently has been on vacation for the last 3 weeks. So things are backed up as she's coming back into the office. And so when we get the approval, then our coordinator will just simply enter in information for those of you who want the SCECHs. So if you do want the SCECHs, if you could either, whichever you feel most comfortable in doing, you can either send me, just me, a message on this chat right now with your pick. That's all I need because I've got your other contact information. So I just would need your pick number, or if you want to send it to me in an email, feel free to do that. Or if you want to send me a text message, I will put my cell phone number in the chat. Whichever way is most comfortable to you, we can certainly make that work. I think that's all I had as we're wrapping up. At this time, Janelle and I are both curious, wondering if you have any questions for us before we sign off, or any questions for each other before we finish up. Janelle, I'm not hearing from anyone or seeing any hands raised. So everything must have been crystal clear the last 3 days. That's a record for us.
When you're the best, you're the best. That's just how it goes. How we roll.
I love your humility.
It has been such a joy to spend the last, yes, I'm sure everyone's still filling out the survey. Becky and I will hang out here for a while just in case you need to finish the survey and you also have a question. You also won't hurt our feelings if you wave a friendly goodbye. I just want to say it's been a real joy getting to know all of you for over the last 3 days. And it's been very affirming. And I know our students are in really, really good hands, based on everything you're bringing forward. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being a teacher and sticking with education and continuing to grow your practice. Becky and I wouldn't currently have jobs if it weren't for all of you. So we're really thankful for the opportunity to work with all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for being amazing, all of you. Have a great school year.
Thank you. I'm sure I'll be reaching out in the future as I have lots of passion for this and appreciate your expertise. So I hope you know what you're signing up for.
We do. And I just want to say that Janelle is one of the kindest, most thoughtful, wonderful human beings that I've been able to work with. So when you contact us, we're both there for you and we're going to get back with you because she's amazing and you're not alone. We got this.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We'll be in touch.